Father, we thank you for love, mercy, and forgiveness. And Father, we just pray that you give us a love and a passion for lost people, for sheep that don't know you, Lord. And as we talk about a very bizarre and sometimes frightening subject, Father, I just pray that you remind us who is really in control, that you are in control wherever we are. And wherever we're not, you're still in control, Father. And there's no curses or spells or rituals or anything like that, Father, that can do a thing to your children. And Lord, we just pray for, instead of a fear of these people, we pray for a love and a passion for them, that we'd reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thanks for the mercy you've shown us, Father. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning to all of you. My name is Bill Honsberger. And I'm the director of something called Haven Ministries. Haven is a mission organization based in Denver, and our target field is, as missionaries, is people in non-Christian religions, which means we talk to about everything in sight, from psychics to witches to Buddhists to Muslims, Scientologists, the Baha'i, pretty much anybody the Lord puts in front of us. Our specialty has been people in non-Christian religions and cults, just because very few people really know how to talk to them. So one part of what we do at Haven is we go to psychic fairs, we go to whole life expos, we'll go to Mormon meetings, we'll go to, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a convention, whatever's going on. We'll go to the bookstores, any place where we can meet and talk to people like this. Second thing we do is try to help Christians who are trying to reach out to their neighbors, their coworkers, their friends. So if your brother's a Buddhist and you haven't got the slightest idea even know what the language you're dealing with, we try to help you through that. Or if your coworkers tells you one day that they've become a witch, like we're going to be talking about today, we try to help you through that conversation as well. And then the third thing we do is come in and speak to Christian groups and churches and stuff like that, explaining what was going on. I've been dealing with world religions. I teach at a college on world religions for the last 15 years. For the longest time, and when you heard somebody talk about witchcraft, it was, come on, this is Bewitched, this is the Wizard of Oz, this is not serious. And that would have been my attitude for the first 2/3 of my life as a Christian. I wasn't raised a Christian, but these weren't options when I was a kid. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, maybe, or go off to Tibet and Nepal in the 60s. But witchcraft, nobody took this seriously. At least nobody we know of took it seriously. But in the late 80s, early 90s, I started to hear rumblings, people talking about certain things. And then all of a sudden I started meeting witches. And I worked as a conservative Baptist missionary for 9 years, as their missionary to the New Age. And I'm running into kids as young as 12 years old in Baptist churches in places like Missouri Valley, Iowa. This is not exactly the Village or Boulder or West Hollywood. This is Missouri Valley, Iowa. And I met a 12-year-old girl there that was already seriously involved in witchcraft. And she was also in the Awana program at her church, just to show you the confusion out there. That was a night my whole attitude changed about this whole thing. If it's in Missouri Valley, Iowa, a little dinky town outside of Des Moines, in an Awana program in this little Baptist church, then it's everywhere. 4 years ago, Newsweek had a poll that said that 70% of teenage girls list this as their number one interest. That is witchcraft. So there's this huge phenomenon going on that became worthy of serious, study. And over the last, now about 15 years, I've talked to dozens of witches from all over the country, gone to some of their booths at different psychic fairs and things like this, had conversations with them. And virtually every one of them I've ever talked to has been raised a Christian. Every single one. In fact, everyone I've ever talked to, I hear rumors of other things, but everyone I've ever talked to was raised Baptist. I don't know why. I was a Baptist missionary at the time most of this was going on, so I'm like, okay, I can pride myself. They were Southern Baptists, not Conservative Baptists like myself. But it's just an amazing phenomenon that you keep seeing one after another these kids coming out of the church, or in many cases adults coming out of the church, and yet committing themselves to this radically different way of looking at things. A couple of the bumper stickers that are really popular, at least around Denver and stuff, "My Goddess is your God's mother." That's a direct shot at Christians. This one's a little bit more from their side of things. Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. "The goddess is alive and magic is afoot." Now, there's a couple things here I want to say about this one. The K is critical for them. We're not talking stage magic here. That's David Copperfield. With the K implies that we really take this seriously as a religious point of view. It's a belief system. And the other thing that's important is that I'm going to comprise, it depends on who you read. I've got a couple books out of my table there, including Jerry Gardner, who's Witchcraft Today was considered kind of the seminal book for all of this in the last 50 years. But depending on who you read and talk to, they might be offended by this or they might admit it. And that's one of the things about witchcraft we need to address is that it's completely autonomous. Literally, you make up your own rules, and one of the key ideas and one of its selling points is that nobody can tell you what's wrong and nobody can tell you what's right. You decide for yourself. And I'll show you that in some different texts that they have. But goddess worship, neo-paganism, goth, vampirism. I've met kids as young as 16 or 17 with hundreds of slices up and down their arms, scars, because they're sucking each other's blood. This is not stage magic. This is, for some people, some very serious, very old-fashioned pagan ideas, some of which we're going to talk about. The first witch I ever talked to told me, I said, well, what does this mean to you? And he says, well, we are a pre-Christian nature religion. And the church came and stomped us out. And then this is kind of the chilling way he said this. I met him down in Colorado Springs. He goes, but now that the church is leaving, we're coming back. And I make the analogy, this is kind of similar to the light being on and the roaches are hiding and the light gets turned off and they all feel comfortable in coming out. Now, it's kind of interesting in some senses because most of the witches I talk to, this is very much a sensibility that they're the victim du jour. They're the oppressed peoples. We're going to go into this in a lot of detail in a few minutes, but here's this little thing out of Durango several years ago. I thought, we're coming out of the broom closet. Now, again, the irony for most of the people that I talk to, again, they're raised Christians, they become witches, and within 6 months, they're victims of all the oppression of the Christian church for 2,000 years or stuff like this. You hear this language. You hear it from Mormons as well, and you hear it from Muslims, interesting enough. They're always victims. But with the Wiccans, again, every person I talk to is a slightly different version, so I don't care whether they call themselves a neo-pagan or goddess worship or whatever. The principles I'm going to be talking about, especially as we talk about how to talk to them, are going to apply across the board. And most of the more serious ones I've talked to admit that all these ideas are really just variations of the same few basic ideas, which, by the way, happen to be the same ideas that the New Agers at large believe and what the Hindus and Buddhists have taught for thousands of years and so on. So we'll talk about some of that detail, but don't get lost. Some of them will get a little bit proprietary. No, we're not like those ones over there. Okay, whatever. But you'll find them very different. Something that actually stunned me the more I got into the dark side of this stuff is the goth movement in particular. And I'm not talking about the goth kids who just dress up like Marilyn Manson because it's a fashion statement or they want to spook straight church people. All right? I'm talking about people who worship death, who take death very seriously. This is Carpe Noctem, seize the night. I saw this for the first time the week of Columbine. My church is about a mile away from Columbine High School, and with many other people from our church, we were down at, would you guys saw the buses bringing all the kids to the elementary school? We were at that elementary school that night. It's one of the more useless nights of my life. It's just very frustrating because I like to make things better, and there was no way that this night with the families was awful. But one of the first things that comes out about how these kids were fascinated with the goth movement, when goths right and left said, no, they weren't goths, they weren't. But there's nobody to determine who's a goth and who's not. There's no goth pope that says you are and you aren't. You follow these rules. Everybody does their own rules. Well, that was Tuesday. On Friday and Saturday, my partner Mark Roggeman, he's a Denver policeman. Mark and I went up to Colorado State University to do a thing on cults in the university, and we sat in on one policewoman whose session was on goths at the university, and she holds up Carpe Noctem. And she opens up the page, a different version than this one, a different edition, and the whole article is why we need to kill jocks. That was in bold letters. A rather stunning thing to see in light of what was just going on. But this is not done on somebody's computer, and printed off on some cheap little Canon or something like this. This is a serious magazine. You can get it at Borders or anywhere else. It's coming out of the closet in all sorts of ways. And they're now declaring themselves to be what they are. And to be considered. So, again, you can go on the internet real quickly and find not just the pop stuff, but some very serious thinkers who have kind of graduated from the punk movement of 20 years ago to, the punk movement of 20 years ago, late 70s, stuff like this, people are sticking pins to their faces and all this kind of stuff. Maybe some of the people here, I don't know. But it was all about we're all going to die anyway, so it doesn't matter if we disfigure ourselves. Well, the goths have kind of taken that a further step. Says we're all going to die. Why not worship that death? In the Carpe Noctem magazines, you'll see party pictures where they'll actually go grab dead bodies out of cemeteries, kidnap the bodies, and use them as party favors, set them around the house as decorations. I mean, some of the most bizarre stuff. But this is not new either. There's been a cult of death, as it were, that goes back thousands of years. You see it in Mexican culture, but I think they got it, the Aztecas had it, the Spanish had it, you see it in the Celtic religions. This stuff goes way, way back. The Shrine of the Skulls that they find in the Celtic underground tombs and stuff like this. Anyways, this a lot of pagan stuff that goes back. That's another thing that scholars are wrestling with when we talk about what is witchcraft, is that some of the scholars are saying, hey, this is all brand new. This is just pop psychology, New Age, blended in with some attempts to model themselves on ancient fertility cults and stuff like this. And other scholars are saying, no, these really are fertility cults. And they really are these old pagan religions. So it just depends on who you read. Again, I don't worry about that. I just try to talk to the individual in front of me. But fertility cults are what the scholars talked about called fertility cults. There's really three parts of them. And the first thing was sacred sex, and you're going to see that all over the stuff I'm going to show you. The belief was, and you can see this, if you read Corinthians, if you read about the temple in Corinth, that's a newer version of the older temple. There was a temple 3 centuries before the time of Christ that the Romans destroyed that had 1,000 free prostitutes for just strangers coming in. Vegas had gambling machines and Corinth had prostitutes, sacred temple prostitutes, men, women, animals. It didn't really matter to them because the idea was to be a good Corinthian meant you would have sex with a temple prostitute. Why? Because you are part of the creative process of nature. This would ensure a good corn crop. This would make sure that the river didn't overflow. This made sure that the cycle of nature continued on. So it was a nature-driven idea, and sacred sex was a huge part of that. So again, to come out as, Paul is encouraging the Corinthians to do, and obviously they're struggling, or 1 Corinthians 6 doesn't make any sense, but as they're coming out of this thing, they're still hanging on to it because it was meant to be a good citizen. Of course you were involved, because don't you want the city to prosper? We must be engaged in the natural process of nature. So sacred sex is a huge thing, and you see it in all sorts of cultures. Another part of that was sacred dance. And you see this in religions like Voodoo and other things pretty pronounced today, or you can see it in the Bhagwan Rajneesh's community 20 years ago, or you can see it in Toronto for that matter. But it's ecstatic trance states. There's some formal versions of it, like the Sufis, which are very mystical trance states. It's kind of a New Age version of Islam, and other things like this. But it's literally working yourself into a fever pitch, losing contact. In some of the religions, they're claiming they're involved with demonic spirits. But that's very, very old. You see it in a lot of different places in the world. And then the people I talk to, most of the people we're talking about today, they all, we love this stuff. This is great. Oh yeah, we're nature religions just like this old stuff. But they all deny this one. And it's the third part of what the scholars talked about, and that is sacred death. Why did hundreds of people die in the pyramids in Mexico hundreds of years ago? Well, it's to make sure the sun would come back the next day. It was about nature driven. It was we had to do this to make sure that the processes of nature would go on. Why did the people in Moab pass their children through the fire, as the Old Testament describes? Well, that's nice King James language. They were slaughtering their kids. Why? It was to make sure that they got a good corn crop. It's to make sure that the hail didn't come and wipe them out, or locusts or something like this. It was all about nature. And they thought that since we're part of nature, by cooperating with nature in these three means, and this really ups the ante, obviously. If this isn't working enough, maybe you need to do this, is what happened. Now, the people I talk to just, no. But we're going to see something changing. I'll talk to you about that later. So anyways, that's what the scholars talked about, but I'm not really running into a lot of scholars when I go to psychic fairs and stuff like this. I'm running into former Baptists and former Pentecostals and other people like this, all who are witches and Buddhists and everything else. This is a book geared for probably about maybe 8 or 9 years old. Alexa is a witch. And it's really kind of interesting because even the image here, we're trying to get away from the wicked witch of the West. We're trying to get away from what they consider as kind of a time-honored Christian thought that Christians have about witches. And first two things I hear out of a witch's mouth. First is, I'm a witch. Second is, and I don't believe in your Satan. They want to distinguish themselves from the Satanists as fast as they can. And most of the stores that I've gone into, a lot of the New Age stores, will have everything there for witchcraft and nothing for Satanism. And I've even gone to stores where they had signs, no Satanists allowed, which is kind of ironic, considering their beliefs really aren't that far apart. But nevertheless, in their own minds, this is a serious point for them. So I always joke around, if you want to see a witch really fly, call them a Satanist, and off in orbit they go. But this is the image they'd rather present. This is the image they're presenting for their kids. This is like Sunday school material, in essence. And it's Alexa as a witch. And she's young and pretty and bouncy and does all sorts of wonderful things. Alexa is a witch, and she has many ideas and beliefs. She gives thanks to many gods and goddesses, yet she gives the most thanks to the divine within herself. Now, if you can't see this picture, I apologize. I'll pass this around. But we have a female and a male god, and that's also indicative of some Wiccan groups, but not of all. Some of the groups are really strictly driven. Some are lesbian only. Some are so strictly lesbian that if you're a member of a coven that talks to men, then this extreme lesbian coven won't even talk to you, even though you're another woman, that type of stuff. So it just depends on where you go. But most of them have a male and female god. And in fact, the idea of Satan to them is that you Christians, remember most of these people are Baptists that I hear this from, you Christians took our wonderful God, the Pan, the horned God, the God of fertility, the God of sex and fun and good times, and you turned him into your devil. And he's really a good God. So anyway, she gives thanks to many gods and goddesses, yet she gives the most thanks to the divine within herself. And that's again, this is geared at little kids, but you'll see this coming up in some of the other things I'll show you. In that sense, it's related directly to the New Age or to old-fashioned Advaita Vedanta Hinduism. It's all God. Everything's God. God is in all of the force. Now, they're not quite philosophically as driven by it as others, but Alexa is a witch, and she is beautiful. She's not something out of a Monty Python skit or something like that. She's great. Pan, the old Greek god. So what are all these things? Well, I'm going to let some of them explain it themselves. What is Wicca or goddess worship or neo-pagan? Here's Margot Adler, probably one of the best known witches, in her book Drawing Down the Moon, which if you had to do a serious study, if I had to say if there's any one book, this would be the book. Wicca is basically a pagan mystery religion with a polarized deity and no personification of evil. Don't believe in your devil. In the Principles of Wiccan Beliefs, it is said, we do not accept the concept of absolute evil, nor do we worship any entity known as Satan or the devil as defined by Christian tradition. Again, in virtually every book you read, this will come out very quickly. We are not Satanists. You Christians are always mixing us up with Satanists. And that actually goes back to some of the history in the medieval, during the Inquisition time, which we'll talk about a little bit later. A lot of what's going on, particularly with goddess worship. First, there was a men's version and a women's version back in the 80s and 90s. This was coming up, but get out in touch with yourself. Get out into the forest, beat drums, run naked, put on masks, and this is how you'll get in touch with your primeval forces of the universe, and in particular the primeval forces of the nature, for the Wiccans and the goddess worshippers. I will show this real quick. Good, that's enough. There's whole things on, honestly, we have a very couple young ladies here. The sacred sex part is off the charts bad in some cases. It's just one of those places where it's just better not to know what the Gentiles are up to, when Paul talks that way. But it's such a huge part of the religion. But some of it is so perverse. And some of this goes back because Wiccans, in some cases, have borrowed from a tradition called Tantra, which goes back at least 2,500 years to the renouncers of within Hinduism, the Buddhists, and some of the other renouncer movements. And Tantra is basically sex magic. And if you have sex in particular ways, and particularly more perverse ways, this gives you more spiritual power. Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism is all about Tantra. We never hear this in the Western press, but how perverse this stuff is. And a lot of Wiccans and goddess worshiper types have latched onto Tantra as a real sign of symbolic, spiritual power. And so it's hard to read through some of the stuff without having this just overwhelming. Interesting enough, one of the witches I heard speak is a woman named Phyllis Coralt. Now, this goddess in the Buddha, green egg here, she talked a lot about, she was the head of the Covenant of the Goddess, and I saw her 12 years ago at the Parliament of World Religions. And she's everything the Wiccan movement wants to be seen as. She's very attractive. She's a Manhattan attorney. She's not some old hag. She's very gorgeous. And if you notice, some of the witches say, well, we don't go door to door like you Christian types. And not only do most of us Christians don't do that anyways, which is sad on another level, but You guys don't need to. Hollywood's carrying all your water for you. You've got The Craft and Practical Magic and Buffy and a zillion shows where Charmed, exactly. All the girls are not only great-looking girls, but they all know karate. Apparently, as soon as you get into, the coven, you learned how to do spinning back kicks and everything. It's an amazing process. But Phyllis talked about she made an interesting point. If I was on her side of the fence, I would agree with her. Phyllis said there's no difference between what I believe and what the Hindus and Buddhists have believed for thousands of years. And in essence, she's right. Wiccans believe that everything's God. Wiccans believe that in reincarnation and karma. They have slightly different versions of this, but so do the Buddhists and the Hindus. So she's right about that. And then she made another interesting statement, which I thought if I was on her side of the fence, I would agree with as well. Why should I, as somebody of Northern European extraction, return, as I get rid of my Christian, stuff, why should I go back to the cultural roots of somebody from Tibet or somebody from Thailand? Why can't I go back to my own pre-Christian roots? Which is the Celtic religions, which is the Norse gods, which is the Germanic gods. And this is all over, in a lot of different places. A friend of mine is a missionary in Germany. They have a temple to Voltron there. I thought Voltron was one of those Transformer characters I bought for my boys about 15 years ago. It turned into a truck and a robot and all this cool stuff. It's actually an old German god. And there's a temple to Voltron now. And people have been meeting there for several years. The Norse god's back. You can get online with Celtic priests, druids, self-proclaimed, and argue with them all day long if you're on the internet in the chat rooms. This stuff is hot. And so a lot of Northern European, which is primarily the base of American immigrants, are returning to their pre-Christian roots. And this is another difference between what's happened the last 15 years ago and what happened 30, 40 years ago, when waves of kids raised in Christian churches blew that off and went to Tibet, went to Thailand, went to Sri Lanka or someplace to find enlightenment, and came back with the names like Ram Dass or something really mystical like this. This generation is not doing that kind of thing. They're saying, hey, we can find out about the stuff on the net in 5 minutes. We can get back into touch with this stuff. And heck, we got Borders selling books on ruins. The stuff that's, if you go into any big bookstore, if you look at all the impulse stuff right by the cash register, what will you see? It's all occultic. It's all based on, almost everything that I've seen there is based on something related to pagan religion of some sort, whether it's tarot or something else. Anyhow, so there's always been a connection between them and the Eastern religions. They acknowledge it. Here's Virginia Satir, very well-known educator. Recognize we all come from the same life force, equipped with the potential for helping ourselves to become fully evolved. Be aware that you have energy to use for yourself. This energy comes from the center of the earth. And that's a very central idea, that the energy is there for all of us. By the way, because of this thought, every which I talk to, the more articulate ones say there's no such thing as the supernatural in the way you Christians think. And that's a little semantic game they're playing. It's all natural. The ability to do miracles or spells or anything like this that you want to talk about is a natural thing, and it all comes from the center of the earth. It moves through your feet and your legs, and it grounds you. Now say to yourself, I am able, I can do this. I have the energy through my groundedness, my relationship to the heavens, and my interconnectedness with others, I am able. It's also, again, very similar to what most Buddhists and Hindus will say. Here's Starhawk. First president, Phyllis Krall that I saw was, I think, the third president of Covenant of Goddess. Starhawk was the first. The model of the goddess fosters respect for the sacredness of all living things. Witchcraft can be seen as a religion of ecology. Its goal is harmony with nature so that life may not just survive, but thrive. And that really kind of fits the mentality. Most of them think that we are a nature religion, and that's a wonderful thing. We would never harm anybody. We're not like those evil Satanists, and we're especially not like you evil Christians, which we'll get into more detail. Very popular idea, particularly amongst pagan or feminist scholars. In the beginning, there was no God, there was the goddess. She appeared in the great void and created the heaven and the earth. In this new domain, women ruled. The world was peaceful, and both sexes worshipped her. Now, I'm in a doctoral program at the University of Denver, and just about done now. And one half of the program is split up between the University of Denver, and the other half is Iliff Seminary, which is a United Methodist school in name. It's the most pagan place you'll ever be around. And I had to take one class with several Iliff students. Most of my program was at DU. And this is gospel. There was a time it's called the pre-matriarchal period. There was a time in history, before history was written, when the universe was run by the goddess. And why there was no crime and no war and no poverty, no racism, no sexism. Nothing awful was happening in the world. And then that nasty male god showed up out of the Far East and just ruined everything. So what is the solution, obviously, to all our problems? We'd have to return to the goddess. And this is put forth by professors, one professor from UCLA, Marija Gimbutas, I think her last name is for sure Gimbutas. She's dead now, but you can watch PBS and they'll show specials of her. Al Gore quotes her repeatedly in his book Earth and the Balance 15 years ago. She's got the proof that everybody worshipped the goddess and what a wonderful world we lived in. Now, she's mocked by her peers because of her selective use of evidence. She would find these goddess figures in different places around the world. She'd say, see, everybody worshipped the goddess. What she wouldn't mention is there was also male god figures, but that didn't fit into her formula. But nevertheless, in her own world, she became a hero. And Iliff Seminary is dominated by lesbians, all who were going to be pastors in the Methodist Church, and they loved her. I mean, it didn't matter that there was no evidence. Well, all that mattered was this is women taking power for themselves, and that was a huge theme in goddess worship. And we'll talk about some more about that later because there's some important ideas that are very critical for us to understand. The rattle is passed and the first voice is heard. Regarding the use of the W word, witch, for us the educated ones, the word witch conjures images. A gentle grandmother standing over her cauldron of creation, working with her boundless knowledge of the earth, its cycles, chemistry, its flora and fauna and physics. She is brewing up a potion of health and healing. She is the believer in the right order of all natural things, worshipper of the complexity and divinity of all things. She represents the spirit of female, whose calling it is to work magic in the world and enhance the harmony in our lives. She nurtures, she makes well, she loves, which is who we aspire to be as we struggle to forget all of our Christian-based societal programming. Look at this one down here. Spirituality is the breath in my body. Life is God. I believe that every animal creates itself. An interesting little scientific thing. A raccoon becomes a raccoon by adjusting to its surrounding. Fish become fish by adjusting to their surroundings. It wasn't some outside hand that created us. I think that all of us have the spiritual power of creation and recreation. That's the sacred sex motif. I think you are God. I am God. I think all of us put together, everything that exists in the natural world is this God we're talking about, and I think we are the creator. It's very similar to standard New Age stuff. Today, the rebellion of women against male domination is well underway among the intellectual classes, but among the general public, it is by no means so far advanced. Nevertheless, the ferment has started to work. Among its manifestations is a determined, dignified insistence by women that they too have the right to be ordained to the priesthood. This idea has sent shudders through the establishment of the Christian church. One of the objections raised to the ordination of women has been that the priestesses were associated with the old faiths of paganism, and that their reappearance in the church would somehow be a step backwards towards those faiths. This idea, of course, is quite correct, except the pagans would deny it's a step backwards. Now, this is 15 years ago, and if you follow mainline traditional denominations, particularly Episcopalian, Lutheran, Reformed Judaism, United Methodist, this is just a monster fight. This and homosexuality are the two big fights. And the pagan religions, the old denominations are rolling over and playing dead. Because once you get rid of the Bible, you can't really stop the logic of some of this stuff, and off it goes. In our own time, the goddess once again is becoming a symbol of empowerment for women, an inspiration for artists, and a model for resacralizing women's body and the mystery of human sexuality. This is a huge thing, and I'm going to show you a slide. I usually bring the book and I left it out there, but probably the most popular book in the last 6 or 7 years, especially for young kids, is a book called Teen Witch. And let me jump ahead. Maybe I do have the slide. Teen Witch, nobody had ever heard of the author, Silver Ravenwolf, and all of a sudden somebody discovered this book, and it sold on the net, and it was just unbelievable how fast it spread. And it's a rat. It's, I wanted to let you see it, but I'm not going to be able to. Nope, I thought I had the slide. Anyways, if you see the cover, you come over to our booth and you'll see the cover of it. It's about, I think it's 5 kids, all about 14, 15 years old, and they've got, some of them have like the anarchy symbol or the star and the crescent moon of witchcraft or some other, occultic type things. But if you really look at it, they're selling sex. It's just very obvious. And I was telling somebody the other day, it's Calvin Klein meets the occult. It's very overtly sexual and it's very overtly occultic, and it's a very powerful package. And this book just took off. And it's just full of spells and rituals, how to get the boyfriend you want, how to get the girlfriend you want, how to do whatever you want. And that's another hint about what's going on here. It's not only about sex, that's an end, but it's about power. the attraction of this, and for so many people I've talked to, is that you will have power to do things. You just have to know the right spells, the right rituals. You have to get in touch with your groundedness with the earth and all this kind of language. But a huge skin. Sex just dominates the themes. Phyllis Carrault, when I heard her at the Covenant, she's president of the Covenant Goddess, when I heard her, talked about the fact she had 1 hour to explain witchcraft. All the religions of the Parliament had 1 hour. So it was, what is Islam? What is Buddhism? What is this? And hers was, what is Wicca? And so she gets up there, and I would guess out of an hour, she spent a half hour attacking Christianity over sex. I mean, she spent half her time talking about how Christianity has ruined sex and Christianity has destroyed sex, and what we need to do is restore sex to its proper place, its proper role. And how has Christianity destroyed it? Well, Christianity has rules. And having rules on sex destroys it. So we must affirm all forms of sex. And you see this a lot in their literature. And it goes back to the same idea. All forms of sex are part of the recreative natural process of the world, blah, 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 blah. Listen to the words of the Great Mother, who of old was called Artemis, Astarte, Demeter, Aphrodite, Diana, Brigid, Hecate, Isis, and by many other names. I am the beauty of the green earth and the white moon, and the mysteries of the waters. From me all things proceed, and unto me they must return. Let my worship be in the heart that rejoices. For all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. Let there be beauty and strength, power and compassion, mirth and reverence within you. And yet you who seek to know me, know that your seeking and yearning will avail you not, unless you know the mystery. If that which you seek you find not within yourself, you will not find it without. Key idea. The divine is within you, not out there. I've been with you from the beginning, and I am that which is attained at the end of desire. So again, there's not only sexual connotations, but there's more to that. And you can see, again, just from the language here, one of the things that attracts people to witchcraft, as opposed to Satanism. I was a youth pastor in the 80s when the Satanist craze came up. And I thought, this is never going to take off. It's too overtly angry, too overtly rebellious. Most people aren't attracted to that. There's always been an element that is, and in particular, most of the Satanists were teenage boys. That's not accidental. I was making a comparison when probably the most overtly satanic thing that came out 20 years ago was Whitney Houston's song, the Learning to Love Yourself is the greatest love of all. The greatest love of all is the title of it. I said, that was the most overt sexual thing I ever saw. And that was popular because it wasn't in-your-face rebellious. And more people would be attracted to that. Well, that's what really witchcraft offers. We're all about good stuff. We're not in-your-face, angry, nasty people. We want to be celebrating life. We want to be affirming all things. Oh, we have some different paraphernalia, books on the Druids, tarot cards, Wicca the Ancient Way. Sabrina, the teen witch at Denny's. What a deal. This was at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. This is the head of the ISIS cult. This is a bizarre thing. I studied pagan religions at the University of Nebraska about 20 years ago, one of my first graduate classes. And I'm reading about all this stuff here, and this is all being talked of, thousands of years ago. This is what the pagans did. So I go to the Parliament of World Religions, and not only did every religion have a section for, we're going to talk to everybody, but they also had their own kind of greeting room, where they'd have 2 rooms in the hotel set aside. So we went to the Muslim one, we went to this is the ISIS one, the little worship center. This is the head of the ISIS group. She was put on the main stage. This is one really nasty woman, and I'm not going to go into great details, but one of the ironies about this, she represents one end of the goddess thinking. She is the crone, which is for older women. And so a lot of older women have gotten into this because they believe they're not valued in culture, which is probably true in a whole lot of ways. And here's a movement that says if you're an older woman, even though you're not attractive or something like that, that's okay. We bless that. We encourage that. That's great. And that's very attractive if people feel like they've been left out, Anyhow, but the thing that's really tricky about this is that everywhere she went, we didn't get the picture of them in this, she's surrounded by 2 drop-dead, gorgeous 20-something-year-olds. And we went to the ISIS Center to talk to these people. And as we're in there talking, then the girls literally started to strip down because they were going to initiate us into the mystery. And we're like, time to go. We'll talk to you guys later when you come out, But this is I'm like sacred prostitutes in downtown Chicago, the Palmer House Hotel. This isn't 2,000 years old anymore. This is right here. It's right now. And they were all over the place with her. Here were some Wiccans at Grant Park in Chicago. They were drawing down the moon, that book that we get. That's a very important Wiccan ritual. The growth, my numbers here are wrong, but Coming to the Goddess claims they had 20,000 members in 1986. When I saw Phyllis at the Parliament, she said they'd gotten to 300,000 members in 7 years. This is just one umbrella group of pagans. Now, I was at the time a missionary for the Conservative Baptists who'd been around about 50 years and had 350,000 members. So if this is anywhere close to true, this is just stunning growth. Everybody claims to be the fastest religion. Scientologists, witches, Muslims, everybody claims it. I honestly think this is the fastest one, here in the States especially. And I'll give you an illustration. One of the guys I met at the Parliament is a Theravada Buddhist. Again, that's considered by scholars the oldest version of Buddhism. It's an extremely strict life. And the guy I talked to, his name was Sukhasida. Sukhasida was very typical of his generation. He was born in the 50s, grew up in a Lutheran church in Germany, blew that off to go down to Thailand to find enlightenment, and came back as a Theravada Buddhist. Now, to be a Theravada Buddhist, it's an extremely strict life. No sex, no pillows. I mean, just one after another, these grocery lists that the Buddhists have, and the Theravada have a lot of them to live in the monastery. And so that's a tough life if you're going to commit to that. And yet, here is Phyllis saying that we believe virtually the same things that the Buddhists believe, and I agree. But the difference being, of course, is that in witchcraft, you can have sex with virtually anyone, and you can have whatever toys you want in life. Whereas to be a Theravada Buddhist, you can have neither of those. So what do you think will sell well in America for the last 15 years? Duh! This stuff is all over the place. I have whole talks on Buddhism and stuff like this, but even the Buddhism of America is so different pretty much radically than most of what you see in Southeast Asia. So you have, you can be Harrison Ford, you can have multiple homes, or Sting, you can have all these homes, have sex with everybody in sight, and the average Buddhist that would come here from a monastery in Laos or something would just, what is this? This isn't Buddhism, but it's just, this stuff sells well in America. Materialism, sexuality, it's all a big part. So this stuff has grown dramatically. The number on the pagans is wrong, so it's more like 30,000. Now, what I want to go into for a few minutes here, guys, is talk about what they're saying about you. I, of course, am enlightened and not subject to any of these charges, but they do have some words for you guys. Two main things that I run into. Again, the irony is everybody I talk to used to be a Christian of some sort. The younger ones, that's not true. The Goths and the vampires, that's a different story. But the older ones have all come out of a church. So they have what I call as a Christian hangover. And I see this across the New Age all over the place. You listen to somebody like Marianne Williamson, who was a Jewish by birth, but Oprah Winfrey's best buddy, best-selling author, guru to the stars. And Marianne, I sat through a whole session of hers for 2 hours. The world's an illusion, the world's an illusion, the world's an illusion. And at the end takes up a collection for AIDS patients. Which is just, I'm sorry. If the world's really an illusion, there's no disease, there's no people, there's no money. We're not there to hear you. You don't exist. But again, it's this Christian hangover. Christians can't, or the Judeo-Christian culture can't accept all of the Asian thought without trying to spin it to make sense out of it. And that's what you see. Well, in this case, you have people who are coming out of a Christian background for the most part, again, doing some spin jobs on some very bad history and some very bad understandings and ways of thinking. So I want to address these two, because this is what you're going to hear. Now, you hear this from lots of people. The exclusivist as immoral. What do I mean by that? Well, this is what you run into. It is narrow-minded and immoral to think you have the only truth. Again, you can have this conversation with lots of people, not just witches, but I always have it with witches. I have a whole different seminar called How Dare You Say You're Right? And I'm going to be addressing this with the postmodern stuff when I talk tomorrow. But the idea basically being is that I don't care about your evidence or your facts. It's just immoral. You're a bad person just by definition because you think you're right. My dad, who was not raised in a postmodern generation, Southern Baptist, blew that off long before I was born, just called me up, chewed me out 3 weeks ago. Like I was 13. I'm a long ways from 13. But he cusses me out, screams at me. I mean, I hadn't had something like this with him in decades, but it was over this very issue. The mere fact that you think you're right is an offense. And he was upset by something my newsletter had said. I was arguing that Jesus was the only way. Just to even think that way makes you bad dinner company. You're somebody to be shunned at work. We don't even have to talk facts with you because you're a bad person. You think you're right. And that's really where our little postmodern, twist of the culture has gone. To argue for truth is an offense. I had one witch I ran into at a Christian camp up in the mountains above Denver about 6 years ago now, start screaming at me. I was preaching on John 14:6, where Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And I talked about Jesus claiming to be the truth, and she literally stands up and starts screaming at me. She goes, you are just like Adolf Hitler. Wow, why would you say that? She goes, because he thought he had truth, and that's why he did what he did. Now, notice the interesting thing. It wasn't about facts there. It was the fact that somebody claimed to be true. That's what caused mass murder. Now, that's just a 15-year-old girl. Who cares what she thinks, right? Except that in my graduate program, I run into somebody named Parker Palmer, considered the #1 teacher of graduate students in the country. He writes the methodology for teaching for them. Parker Palmer claims to be a Christian, and he argues the same way. That if you believe you have truth, that leads to world wars. Stunningly ignorant statement. But it's just very popular. So this is an incredible thing that's all over the culture, and we'll address it in just a minute here. And then the second charge, which we're going to go into in much more detail, is the murderous church charge. You Christians, and I've heard this all over the country, guys, you Christians have killed 9 million witches. Who would want to be associated with people like you? Wow. I never heard that before. Are you sure? Yes, it's all there. Well, that's a powerful argument. Who would want to be around a bunch of people like that? Now, is it just witches recycling stories? Oh, no, they've got help. Every single year before Halloween, PBS plays a series of movies called The Burning Times. Just watch PBS this coming, about the week before. And The Burning Times about, again, how all these evil, Puritan ministers who hate women with all their heart are running through the forest and, West Baden, Germany or whatever, killing as many earth mamas as they could find, because of course all men hate women and priests especially hate women. And it's just this myth that goes through that they killed 9 million women. But it's very popular. And like I said, I've run into it in all sorts of different parts of the country. So it is literally just a part of their ethos, their way of thinking that Christianity is evil because, if that were the case, I would have a hard time arguing with it. Whether it's the case or not and how we respond to it is a different thing. So let's respond to these arguments, because this is what you're going to run into. For the first one, that it's exclusive to, or immoral, just flat out immoral to be exclusive, I want you to read some of the witch's own material. This is the closest thing you get. Again, witches are autonomous by definition. They don't there's no Wiccan priest that has control of you, at least for the most part. There's, of course, twists wherever you go, but there's no pope, there's no bishops, there's no anybody that tells you. So this is the closest thing you get to a kind of a common agreement amongst them. The American Council of Witches finds it necessary to define modern witchcraft in terms of the American experience and needs. We're not bound by traditions from other times and other cultures, and we owe no allegiance to any person or power greater than the divinity manifest through our own being. I'm God, and nobody can tell me what's right or wrong. Each person decides for themselves. Again, this is a selling point. It's the number 3 thing. I'm a witch. I don't believe in your devil. And each person decides for themselves what is right and wrong. And again, that's kind of reflected that thought. As American witches, we welcome and respect all life-affirming teachings and traditions, and we seek to learn from all and to share our learning within our council. Sounds open-minded. It is in the spirit of welcome and cooperation that we adopt these few principles of Wiccan belief. On seeking to be inclusive, now of course this makes you a good person. You're bad by definition as an exclusivist. If you're the kind of person who says, well, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe my way's right, they love you. You don't care what you believe as long as you don't believe you're right. On seeking to be inclusive, we do not wish to open ourselves to the destruction of our group by those on self-serving power trips or to philosophies and practices contradictory to ours. We do not want to deny participation with us to anyone who are sincerely interested in our knowledge and beliefs, regardless of race, color, sex, age, national or cultural origins, or sexual preference. Do you notice any slight inconsistencies in this? We want to be inclusive and accepting of everybody as long as you agree with us. Well, doesn't everybody say this? One of the ironies, of course, this whole idea that somehow to be inclusive or to be exclusive makes you a bad person is the sheer hypocrisy this forces you into. And I'll give you an illustration. I was doing this seminar at the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College about 6 years ago. And the week before the seminar, we were doing a radio show to kind of promote for the conference, and I got asked to do this, and so I'm talking about witchcraft, and this witch calls in, and he is furious. You Christians, you're a bunch of hypocrites, blah, blah. Which, every time I have this conversation, he says, how dare you say you're any better than Buddha or Lao Tzu or Krishna or anybody else? It just really frustраtes me when you Christians talk this way. The guy's just going off. And Don Vino and his wife were running the radio show. Don's here doing seminars this week too. And Don's wife, Joy, handled this so beautifully. She goes, wait a second, calm down. Let me get this straight. What you're saying is that each person has the right to decide for themselves what they believe, and that no one has the right to tell them that they're wrong. And we must affirm each other in whatever we believe. And the guy immediately calms down. Oh, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. She goes, okay, well, I believe Jesus is the only way, and everybody else is going to hell. Am I wrong? The guy just lights up again like, but he can't say. Notice the box he's in. You're arrogant. She goes, that's not what I asked you. Am I wrong? Now, of course, remember rule number 1. Everybody's right. You must affirm everyone. No one has the right to criticize. Yet Christianity is the bane of the planet. It's amazing. When I have to take forays into enemy territory by going over to Isle to pick up my mail, it's just amazing. Orthodox Christianity is despised. All religions are wonderful. My first committee was headed up by a Tibetan Buddhist, Jose Cabazon, who's now, thank God, over at Santa Clara. But just one of the more arrogant people you'll ever meet. Just despised all things. Of course, the Tibetan Buddhism is so open-minded and accepting of all paths. The Dalai Lama's on record ripping other versions of Buddhism, let alone Christianity and the other religions. But it doesn't matter. He's supposedly the wonderful, accepting, inclusive person. It's not true. And they're no more inclusive than anybody else. If you disagree with them, they don't want you there. Fine. Let's just call it what it is. But as soon as, in the other half of the hour when Phyllis had, the first half was on Christians ruining sex, the other half hour was like this. Well, my name is Phyllis Kralt, and I'm a witch. And this is what witchcraft means to me, blah, 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 blah. But I don't want to claim to speak for anybody else. And then the next person stood up. He goes, well, my name's so-and-so, and I'm a witch. And here's what witchcraft means to me. But I don't want to claim to speak for anybody else. And I went around the room after about 15 minutes. And you finally, after a while, got the message. No one can speak for anyone else. There was a special on spirituality on the E! Channel a couple of years ago, Hollywood and spirituality. Most of us Christians go, oh, surely that can't be right. They can't be. No, they're very spiritual. They're not Christian. They're very religious. Trust me. And celebrity after celebrity. Well, I'm into Scientology, but I would never say my way is the only way. Well, I'm into Wicca, but I would never say my way is the only way. Well, I'm into Vedanta, or I'm into Kabbalah, but I would never say my way is the only way. And after a while, you got the real message. You can believe anything you want. Just don't say your way is the only way. All right? So we're claiming to be very tolerant and very loving. And I always say that I have been cussed at and screamed at, and in some cases spit at, by the most loving, tolerant, accepting people that you'll ever know. I mean, just ask them, and they will tell you how loving and tolerant they are. They despise me with every ounce of their being if they find out you're a Christian. Some of you maybe have tried to witness to people and found that come up. In fact, I wrote a paper, it's on our website, called Revenge of the Enlightened. And in that paper, I went to several religious websites, religioustolerance.org. Well, shouldn't it be the perfect model of what we're talking about here? Inclusivity, the good guys? Well, if you read their stuff on the website, it's like, we seek to open the path for all religions. All religions are different paths up the same mountain. All religions are different spokes on the wheel. We've got to do something about the religious right before they destroy the country. It's just amazing. They can't go a paragraph without contradicting themselves. And that's what my point is. They can claim to be inclusive all they want. They're not. Havenministry.com. Let me give you another illustration of this whole phenomena. I have brown eyes. I'm wearing tan sandals, and Santa Fe is not the center of the universe. Now, I just made 3 exclusive statements, 2 positive, 1 negative. Let me ask you guys this. Be honest now. When I said that I have brown eyes, were some of you really crushed and hurt by that sentiment? Did that really hurt you? I mean, come on, if it hurt you, we want to get you into some therapy immediately, all right? When I said I had brown eyes, I immediately excluded blue and yellow and green and possibly other mixes. Yet it didn't seem to strike any of you as deeply offensive. When I said I had tan sandals on, I excluded white tennis shoes, my dress black shoes, my chukka boots, and my pink bunny shoes that nobody will ever get to see. But did anybody get deeply hurt by that one? No? Well, how about when I said, and I realize not all of you are native here, but how about when I said Santa Fe is not the center of the universe? Now, that's a negative exclusive claim. Did that strike you as incredibly offensive just to say it? No. Why not? But these were all exclusive statements. I thought exclusive statements made you a bad person by definition. Here's the problem, guys. Everybody makes exclusive statements, and they do it literally thousands of times a day. It's a part of our normal syntax. It's the way we speak to each other. Honey, could you give me the keys? No, not the VW, the station wagon. We just excluded. We always do this. When Phyllis Kroll got up in front of the room and said, I'm a witch, she made an exclusive statement. She's defining who she is. She was, by definition, saying as well, not only I am a witch, I'm not a Jew, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a Hindu. She says, I'm a witch. That's an exclusive statement. If I were to be offended on the same level they claim they are offended, then we could be offended with witches all day long. My point is this is just a silly semantic game. Okay? People claim to be, they're the tolerant ones, and yet they scream and cuss you out because of your claim to believe that you're right. I don't know anybody that thinks they're wrong. Have you ever talked to anybody in a different religious tradition that thinks they're wrong? Well, I'm a Muslim, and of course all of us wrong. I don't have that conversations. Maybe somebody else does, but I don't. People think they're right. That's just the way we all are. And the fact is all the world's religions make exclusive statements. Christianity is just honest about it. And you can read C.S. Lewis talking about this 50 years ago. That Christians, there is an exclusive claim on the table there with Jesus, but there are exclusive statements from the other world religions as well. But they don't get publicized. We don't stress about them because we're, Americans and we have this heritage. But nevertheless, I don't think this is a hard argument to deal with, but I deal with it all the time. People are always frustrated by this. But again, as the conversation on the radio show showed you, it doesn't take long for their so-called tolerance, to fade out of the window really fast. A more serious charge. And if I had my PowerPoint with me, you'd see this supposedly. Bad. Not only the PBS, but the History Channel and everybody else. I've bought health videos where it talked about how the witches were killed by those medieval Catholics and terrible Puritans. If you saw what was a terrible destruction of one of my favorite cartoons growing up, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, when they did the movie a few years ago, you got Johnny Depp, and he's this investigator coming back to investigate a murder in his hometown. There's 2 Puritan ministers in the town. One is a murderer, one is an adulterer. So we got great illustrations going on there. And Johnny Depp keeps having flashbacks to his own past growing up in this same little town. He'd gone off to the big city to be a cop. And his father was the Puritan minister of the town, and he was an evil, hard, terrible man. And his mother was a witch. Of course, that was a marriage that I'm sure happened all the time in Puritan New England. Well, he'd have visions of his father doing terrible things. Then he'd have visions of his mom. She would be out in the forest, and she would spin and twirl through the trees because she could float above everything. And she was so wonderful and gracious. And one scene, they show the father opening up the door behind the pulpit, and he goes into this room right behind the pulpit. And in there is about every torture instrument you can think of, from the Iron Maiden to thumb screws. And I almost walked out at that point because that was the stuff that was being used mainly against the Protestants during the Inquisition, not against earth mamas, okay? Witchcraft is, we're going to talk about this whole thing in a minute here, but the reality is that it paints an image. If you ask most people of what this is all about, because of what the media has done to this, why Christians really do hate women, Christians really do hate witches, and Christians were always in the business of killing witches. Now, there's some tremendous books about the history of this, and you're welcome to get them. They're not written by Christians with an axe to grind or trying to protect the faith. And one book I read last year, it's excellent, that I highly recommend, is called To God Be the Glory by Rodney Stark. He's not a self-confessed believer. He's a University of Washington historian. And he talks very openly about, he's got 3 issues in mind: slavery, the issue of the church and slavery, the issue of the church and science, and the issue of the church and witchcraft. And he addresses this in a very good historical manner. That's pretty new, but I've been reading books for about 20 years on this subject, and most historians just blow this stuff to shreds. Doesn't matter, because in the popular culture, this is what sells. This is what's on PBS, and this is what the young people I talk to believe. They really believe that Christians killed 9 million witches. Where does that come from? Well, Jerry Gardner. If you go out to over to my table later, I'll show you the book. You can go right to the page where he claims that Christians killed 9 million witches. That's where the number came from. That book was published in 1954. And Jerry is kind of the hero to most witches. There's all sorts of denominational splits along personality lines. But Jerry was an English civil servant who helped get the laws in England against witchcraft repealed. So you could be an open public witch and be a civil servant. So that made him kind of a hero. And his books kind of set the stage for the modern rebirth of all this. Jerry's interesting things. You read the very same paragraph that the number 9 million comes from. He admits that we don't know if this number is anywhere close to true, and we don't even know if these people are witches. But that part's not repeated by the people I talk to. Even Jerry Gardner knows that this number is fictitious. But it doesn't matter. I had one witch tell me at a Whole Life Expo several years ago, she says, you know where Jerry Gardner got that number? And I said, no. He says, oh, well, he just took the number 6 from the Holocaust and inverted it. Well, that's good history. It works for me. But, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. Even this guy was telling me that he knows this is a fictitious number. It doesn't matter. They wear this on their sleeves. They are the victims du jour. Christians are killing us. We can't come out and admit who we are because we'll be oppressed over and over and over again. That's the story. So let's address this issue from some different angles, okay? Let's see which slide we want to get to here. All right. Did the Christian church really kill 9 million witches? Well, this is really about the Inquisition. Most serious historians of the Inquisition argue, in fact, the most liberal number you'll ever see in print is about 300,000 victims of the Inquisition. There are some more conservative historians that put the number closer to 60,000. But even that number is suspicious when you start breaking it down and looking at it. And again, don't take my word. If you go on my website, I've got this presentation on there, and I have a paper on there with a lot of the bibliographical references that you can read after the fact, which is written by Harvard historians that address the Salem issue and other ones, and a whole lot of really good books on witchcraft by Paul Boyer and other scholars. So either way you take the number, let's suppose it's 300,000 for right now. Most of these people were in fact not witches. In fact, witches weren't even the primary target of the Inquisition at all. Anybody want to guess what the primary target of the Inquisition was? Yeah, I would call them pre-Lutheran Protestants, for the most part, were the primary target. People that most of us don't know about, like the Hutterites and the Waldensians and other people like this. And the Catholic Church had this wonderful way of dealing with those who would oppose them. Like in some of these cases, these people had translated the Bible. Ooh. Can't have people reading the Bible in Catholic Europe. In some cases, the Waldensians would go 2 by 2 to different towns and share the gospel and feed people and do things like this. That made them, because they were not doing it under the orders of one of the official orders of the church, that made them enemies. All sorts of stuff was going on. And what the popes would generally do is to say you had a village that had gone bad, gone to seed in this case. Well, he would call for one of his local dukes or princes to do him a favor, take care of the problem. The Duke would get a nice little certificate, Defender of the Faith. Ironic that we're doing this at this conference, isn't it? Because that was an old Catholic line. If you wiped out the enemies of the Pope, you got a certificate calling you a Defender of the Faith. It got you some free time through purgatory. And you killed 5,000 witches in this village. Of course, the fact that they weren't witches, which is going to be symptomatic of everything I'm talking about. Anybody want to guess what the number 2 target of the Inquisition was? Jews. The witch issue becomes an issue in a big-time way only in the late 1400s. A couple of monks write a book, I can't say the Latin, but in English it's The Hammer of Witches. And all of a sudden it becomes a formulaic version of how to address the witchcraft issue, what questions to ask, kind of the Monty Python test, you know, if she floats, she's made of wood, and therefore she's a witch, and all this kind of silly stuff. Thank you, very simple. I'm glad somebody here can speak Latin, I can. Anyways, they write this book, and this becomes a big hot thing, but they were not the primary target. And one of the things Rodney Stark points out in his book is that witchcraft erupts in certain areas, and it'll rise up and it'll die down. And he talks about something else. One Latin word I do know is maleficium. And it's where we get the word malice. And maleficium is a curse. All right? And he talks about how this is more of a driving issue than anything else. Because a lot of the people that were accused of being witches, even when the trials would come up, they tended to be outsiders. A lot of time they were men. They weren't just women. And let's suppose you had some cranky old guy at the end of the town, lived by himself, and some of the local boys would come by and throw rocks at his house or do what teenage boys like to do sometimes. And so he'd come out of his house chasing him. Well, you kids, I'm going to curse your whole family. And a year later, one of the families of the boys, their cow dies. He had power. That curse worked. That's maleficia. The evil intent of the curse was enough to not only kill the cow, but to get you put to death for being a witch. Whether that was your actual religious beliefs or anything like that was irrelevant. And we're going to see this as we go into Salem, especially. I'm going to argue, by the way, that if one witch is killed, it was wrong from the Christian perspective. But just one thing we need to understand, the 9 million number is a fairy tale. It's fictitious. They admit it. You know, the rank and file don't admit it because they haven't read it deeply enough. But the fact is, it's all a fairy tale. And it really is. And let me illustrate this much further by going into Salem itself, America's homegrown version. Let me just ask you guys first a general question. Approximate if you don't know. Anybody know how many witches were burned at Salem? 3. Anybody else? 65. Okay. Anybody else? I'm sorry? 300? 0. Not a single witch was burned at Salem. 19 people were hung. 1 person was crushed by rocks. Not a single witch was burned. But you'll never know that. Because CNN, of course, not only is PBS playing the burning times, but every year CNN goes, well, up until the last 2 years, they haven't done it, but they would go to Salem and interview a woman named Cabot Lodge, who was the official witch of Salem, who would walk you through the story. Of course, the evil Protestant ministers who were killing the wonderful earth mamas of Salem. It's a fairy tale. The great majority of the people who died at Salem stood up and before they were hung said, I'm a member of the Congregational, which is the name for the Puritan Church. I'm a member of the Congregational Church. I worship Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I forgive those people who are doing this to me. Now, does that sound like a Wiccan statement to you? It's not. It's not even close. But again, the facts and reality don't match up with the popular image. We don't even know the story ourselves. But historians do, guys. This is kind of a partial map of Salem itself. Salem is 2 towns at this time, Salem Town and Village. Historians actually have every single house mapped out where every single family that lived in 1692 lived. So they have a lot of details on what happened in Salem. If you notice, like most communities, there's a good side of town and a bad side of town. Virtually every town you ever go into in the world has that kind of element to it. One of the things that makes historians act funny about this whole thing is that they notice that in the map here, virtually everybody is accused of being a witch, and virtually everybody who is a defender, saying that person's not a witch, comes from one side of the town, while virtually all the accusers come from the other side of the town. That's one of those things that makes historians go, what's going on here? Maybe it's not what we think it is. The real story is there's these 3 girls, and they were with a slave from the Dominican, I think she was. Her name is Yoruba. Nobody really knows that's her real name because Yoruba is actually a religion. But anyway, she's teaching them little spells. Well, little Puritan girls aren't supposed to be learning spells. They get caught. And one of the girls goes into there's a picture in one of my books that somebody drew of it. And it basically looks like a grand mal seizure. She starts shaking and throwing herself all over the ground. She's got foam coming out of her mouth. She is just losing it. And everybody freaks upon seeing this. Oh my gosh, this has got to be something spiritual. And the witch trials start. The girls are arrested. Not content to go down alone, the girls start naming names. Mrs. Smith, she did it. Mr. Jones, he was involved too. And those people arrested. And then they start naming names. At the height of the whole thing, which went on for months, about 200 people at any time were the maximum number in the jail. This all goes on till one specific day when somebody accuses Governor Winthrop's wife of being a witch, at which point the governor comes in and shuts down the whole thing. End of trials. Poof, gone. Never happened. Amazing how that all worked out that way. The reality of what went on in Salem is very different, again, than the myth. But the trials were very real, and they were very horrific. And interesting enough, the trials, and the fact that the governor could do this is indicative of what's going on here. The trials were not pushed by the ministers. Only one minister, every other minister in Salem opposed the trials. One minister, Cotton Mather, was a fan of the trials, pushed it. And at the end of the whole thing, came out and led a public repentance, admitting he was completely wrong. But every other minister opposed it. In fact, the ministers all around the area opposed it. Why? Well, one is that almost all these guys were educated either Oxford or Cambridge, or it came out of Harvard, which was about 50 years old at this time. At that time, it was still a very serious Christian seminary. They were almost all of them, to the man, were big fans of Isaac Newton. They'd all read his book on physics, Principia Mathematica. They took very seriously that there's not spirits behind every bush in the universe, which had been the pagan Catholic model that was so popular across Europe. Newton it's one of the reasons why he's hated in some of the grant programs I've been involved in, because he despiritized the universe. You don't need a spirit making leaves fall down and stuff like this, which was where old Europe was at. So they're all fans of Newton, and the number one type of evidence that was used in the trials is something called spectral evidence. Now, spectral is an Old English word from spectre. It means a ghost. And this is what was being used as evidence. If you would not confess, you would go on trial. And when you go on trial, let's say Terry here is the accused witch. All right? Terry's on trial for his life. He's claiming he's not a witch. Bad move, Terry. Bad strategy here. So they would bring me in as the witness. I'm the one who's confessing that I'm the accuser of Terry as a witch. And I'd be over there in the docket, and I'd say, he's a witch! And I could do he turned me into a new type thing. But what I would do instead of that, I would say, there's evil spirits all over him. My gosh, it's horrible! Ah! The fact that nobody else in the room could see the evil spirits was irrelevant. It's spectral evidence. So the minister's going, not only does this not stack up with the law of Moses, where you need 2 or 3 witnesses who actually saw something, but this is bad science as well as bad Bible. The ministers were opposed to the trials. You'll never hear that today. One minister pushed it. It was the magistrates. It was the civil magistrates that pushed the trials, which is why when the governor said no, that ended the whole thing. Now, here's what's going on inside the jail as these trials are going on. People being rocket scientists, and here's where the actual Monty Python moment actually does show up. If you confess, you might be put in the stocks and whipped a couple times, but you'd be let go if you signed a confession. If you did not confess, you were going to go on trial, and chances are be convicted and killed. So being the rocket scientists that they are in the jail, they started to think this through. Confess, live, hold on to my faith, die. Where do I sign? I'm a witch. Several hundred people signed these declarations, these confessions of being a witch, all of which were recanted afterwards. And every one of them says, hey, look, I was scared for my life. That's why I signed the thing. I don't believe in this stuff. And again, the people who did die, for the most part, weren't witches either. I argued there wasn't a single witch who died in Salem, as far as somebody who actually believes and practices the religion of witchcraft. What it doesn't prove is what Christians do to witches. What it does prove is what stupid Christians do to other Christians. And that's an old phenomenon. Okay? That's an old issue. I think what most historians, and I'll give you an illustration from the French Revolution, which is kind of good 100 years after this mess. In the French Revolution, they were putting down 2 things. They were putting down the church and the state. And during the reign of terror at its height, all it took to get you killed was to be associated with either the government, the state, the king, the civil government, or to be associated with the church in some way. So if you're Pierre the butcher and you're mad at Louis the candlestick maker because he stuck you on a deal several years ago, here's how you fix your problem. All you have to do is say, Pierre, I saw him over at the bishop's house. He works for the bishop. And there would be a 30-second trial, and Pierre would lose his head over the whole thing. That's real human behavior, and that's really what the kind of thing that's going on here. When historians see the predominance of the numbers, you start realizing, hey, there's a reason why these people are attacking each other. And it has nothing to do with who's actually a witch. It has a lot to do with much more basic human issues. Why Cain killed Abel, and why we do these things all over the world. It's because we're sinners. And we hold vengeance, and we want revenge, and we are envious and greedy, and all the other stuff that plagues humans. Had nothing to do with real witchcraft. It doesn't matter, folks, because nobody takes this seriously. So let me give you a different response other than historical. Oh, I have this out of order all the time. Here is the psychic duck, the parrot. He's reading for the other chickens. Whoa, another bad one. I see your severed head lying quietly in the red-stained dirt. A surprised expression is frozen in your lifeless eyes. Next. And all the chickens are freaked out, of course. It's interesting how psychics and tarot card readers never have a negative message for you. It's always good no matter where you go. Well, that's just a sideline, so I need to put that in a different place. There. Let's talk about a philosophical response to this. And I don't mean we're going to get deep into Plato or Aristotle or something like this. I'm just talking about how we respond to these people. Whether it's 9 million or one witch, doesn't matter. And this is where the title of this talk comes from, Why Not Burn Witches? Remember what witches say themselves. Now I'm going to give you a type of argument. In Latin, it's reductio ad absurdum. It just means reduced to the absurd. Don't get lost on that. It's just a simple way of thinking. And you've probably done it your whole life without knowing the formal name. It's just you start with the other person's point of view for a minute, see where it runs. So you really think the Broncos are the best team in the league this year. Well, what about this, and this? Okay, that type of thing. So what we're going to do with this type of argument is just start with the other person's point of view. See where it leads you. So you really believe that Christians are evil because they killed 9 million witches. I'm just going to start with their point of view. Okay? But I'm going to put it against something else they also hold on to. Okay? Remember what I told you that is so critical to the witches, and you saw a couple examples of this. I'm a witch. I don't believe in your devil. And each person decides for themselves what is right and wrong, and nobody has the right to criticize them. That's what I hear. Every time I talk to them, I read them in print, same exact argument comes out. Okay, let's just run with that. Let's suppose that it's true, on the one hand, that each person decides for themselves what is right and what is wrong, and no one has the right to criticize them. Well, if that's really the case, then why can't me and some of my Baptist buddies run up to Boulder and fry a few earth mamas? Who are you to say I'm wrong? I'm just using the force of their own argument. If you're really going to seriously try to argue that each person decides for themselves that if 9 million or 90 million witches were killed by Catholics, Puritans, who are you to criticize? or to criticize the conquistador, or a zillion other versions. The Crusaders issue's coming up big with the movie coming out this weekend. Who are you to criticize if each person decides for themselves? So I'm going to use their alleged open-mindedness and tolerance against them. However, if it really is wrong, whether 9 million or one witch is irrelevant, if it really is wrong to kill witches, then your statement about morality just fades right out. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim the moral high ground by claiming that it was evil, those evil Christians did this, who would want to be around a religion like that, if in fact your own statement about morality is true, that each person decides for themselves. Now, interest enough in morality, and let me just, real quickly here, the witches have two big things. One is the Wiccan Rede, R-E-D-E, which is, and it harm none, do what you will. The irony of that whole thing, and it sets them up. Other occultists and Satanists have been using this for a long time. Aleister Crowley, I think, is one of the first ones that wrote it. But if you take this seriously, one of the fun things about it, since there's no authority in witchcraft higher than the divinity within yourself, you decide for yourself what the word harm means. And just like Hollywood has done such a great job, every time there's a movie in Hollywood where there's an adultery involved, what do you see? Why, if it's the husband was such a jerk, of course his wife had to run off with this loving guy, and we're all celebrating at the end that she found her true soulmate and true love and deserted this creep. Well, I can do that with anybody. Well, of course I had to take her away from her husband. He was a creep. He was a lowlife. He was a jerk. It was a wonderful, loving thing to take her away. I can justify anything if you leave this open to me. I actually downloaded this paper last year. It's a master's thesis. Wicca, Wiccans, and Ethics, Religious Definitions. Well, I've been giving this argument, this seminar here is about 10 years old, for a long time. Here's the fascinating thing. Here's this Wiccan scholar. And the number one complaint in 100 pages here is how there's all this sexual abuse going on in the covens. I'm confused. I thought it was rules that ruin sex. I thought it was the rules of Christianity what was harmful. And so we've got to have no more rules and that'll solve all our problems. Kind of like the French equality, fraternity, liberty. Just give it to the state and the church and we'll have paradise on earth. And 100,000 people later, the lie was seen for what it is. Here's the reality is that, you know what? And you have no rules, guess what? Strongly eat the weak. Always do. And it's all this sexual abuse going on where people are doing what they always do. Taking advantage. The reality is that the Wiccan Rede doesn't work. They also claim, we have the threefold law of karma. Why Wiccans would never do anything wrong? Because it'll come back to you threefold times. And I'm like, well, where does that happen? How does that happen? It's a statement of faith, right? Well, yeah, because you can't prove that. Well, who teaches this statement of faith? Since there's no authority higher than the divinity within yourself, how do you know? Maybe it's the non-karma. Maybe there's 15 rules, 15 flows of karma back to you. How do you know? And nature is the guide. And I hear that from every witch I've ever talked to. Why, nature teaches us. Well, I mentioned that Sukhasida fellow, the Theravada Buddhist. Let me use the conversation I had with him at the end of the Parliament. Theravada Buddhist is atheist by definition compared to other versions which are not atheists. But Theravada Buddhist claims to be atheist. And Sukhasida comes down and sits right next to me in the Parliament. That's how we got to meet each other. And first thing he does when he sits down, he gives me all this Buddhist literature. I give him a bunch of Christian stuff, and that starts our conversation, which went on for about 2 years. And at the end of the Parliament, the last day there, I said, because in his writing over and over again, his statements against violence. I said, Sukhasida, I really appreciate, that you believe it's wrong to kill. I agree. But let me ask you something. He's an atheist. How do you know it's wrong to kill? And he goes, well, each person hears a still small voice, and it tells them it's wrong to kill. And I said, Sukhasida, that's a really good, interesting idea, but some people hear the still small voice, and it tells them to kill all bad women with an axe or something. And he goes, well, that's true. He goes, well, actually, nature teaches us that it's wrong to kill. Now, this is before Animal Planet, okay? So I couldn't go to the obvious. So I go, Sukhasida, that's a really interesting idea, and there's a lot of beauty and wonderful things in nature, but all you have to do is, if you don't know who this is the precursor to Animal Planet. All you have to do is watch a David Attenborough video on the BBC for 5 minutes, and you realize all nature is animals killing each other and making little animals which kill each other. I said, there's a lot of beauty in nature, but the one thing you cannot say is nature teaches you that violence is wrong. And he goes, literally, starts yelling at me. He says, you just think you need a personal God or something to tell you what's right and wrong. Bingo. I said, exactly right, Sukhasida. He's not like my bolder variety relativist, okay? He really wanted a world where it was wrong to kill. That is near and dear to the kingdom of God. I'm going to affirm that in him when I hear that from him. Because that is near and dear to the kingdom of God. The problem is that he doesn't want it to, again, unlike the bolder
relativist, he really wants this not to be a matter of opinion. He doesn't want half the room to say, well, it's up to them. They get to decide, they like to kill, and this half says no. He wants a place where everybody. He wants what we might call a transcendent or absolute ethic, where it's always wrong to kill. It's wrong in Detroit, and it's wrong in Brazil, and it's wrong in Moscow, and it was wrong yesterday, and it's wrong today, and it'll be wrong tomorrow. He wants an absolute ethic. The problem is that in giving up on God, the God he grew up believing in, the Lutheran Church, he had to find something else larger than all of us that could give us an absolute. So he tries to turn to nature. Nature is larger than all of us in some symbolic sort of way, I guess. But the problem is nature doesn't teach you to love your neighbor. Nature teaches you to eat your neighbor, especially if they're slow and sick. You can say whatever you want, but as soon as a Wiccan wants to point to ethics coming from nature, and nature is a guide, I'm going to go, you know what? This is where you guys are playing around. So sometimes, when I've had long-standing relationships with some, I said, you're really Christian witches, aren't you? Which, by the way, they don't like. But I said, you're all about this stuff, but you haven't taken the big step yet. If you really want to be a nature religion, let's be honest what nature is and what the real old-fashioned nature religions really look like. Now, that argument worked for a long time. I want to read you something else. We'll end with this, and if you have questions, I can talk you guys out of the booth. This is an article I picked up 6 years ago in the Beltane Papers, which is a Wiccan magazine you can get at Borders or anywhere else. And it's called Sacred Abortions, under a pseudonym, Hazel Lewis. We don't know who this is. I grabbed this, and it was stunning. Because it starts off by basically being a thing that, a lot of women feel guilty about having abortions. And so what are we going to do about that? Well, let's turn abortion into a religious ritual, a sacred rite. And we'll have candles, and we'll do incense, and we'll do chanting and mantras and all this wonderful stuff. And then the woman who was writing the article channels, if you're not familiar with the term, it's very popular amongst New Agers, the belief that you can literally speak to the Spirit or a Spirit speaks through you or something like this. Well, in this case, the woman who's doing the article channeled the baby inside of her mom. The baby was about 6 months along. And guess who the baby turned out to be? This is going to get confusing, so take good notes. The baby is the actual mother of the pregnant woman. So this is grandma inside daughter, but actually his baby. All confused yet? Because it gets worse. All right. So they have this conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, grandma/baby says, it's okay to kill me because I didn't want to come back to stay. I just wanted to come back and visit. So then she describes how they had the abortion, and then they did some more chanting, did some more incense and all this kind of stuff. And then this is how she ends the article. I want you all to hear this. Be good to yourself afterwards. Have something nourishing to eat. Burn some incense or light a special candle. Surround yourself with soft textures and soothing colors and get some sleep. Rest in the arms of the mother. I mean that by the goddess for a while. If you need to cry. A good book or video may help you get started. Talk to people who understand. Pray directly to the great mystery. Tell her how you feel. Allow yourself to be comforted and nurtured. Take heart from the idea that when you are able to create ceremony and a sense of spirit around the abortion event, you engage in a spirit healing for millions of women who have been through the abortion process and who still bear the spiritual and emotional scars. The early Christian church was threatened by the goddess's sexuality. But because the goddess refused to die, the Virgin Mary became a more acceptably sanitized version of the Great Mother. Actually, I think there's some truth to that whole argument, but I haven't got time. Today, many of us who read this magazine seem ready to embrace the sexual aspects of the goddess while remaining resistant to her destructive side. But we can't stay in creative generative mode forever. Our culture is learning the danger of unchecked growth with every new case of cancer. It may be time, and I wish I had this picture here, it may be time to fully embrace Kali. Now, Kali is the black goddess of India. She's the girlfriend of Shiva the Destroyer, and Kali is a murderous blankety-blank, whatever you want to call her. She's always pictured with skulls around her neck, skulls around her arms. She's on a bed of skulls. She's holding skulls in her hands. This is one nasty person. In some of the Hindu legends, she even kills Shiva, who's the actual god of destruction. So this is not a pretty person. You got introduced to a Hollywood version, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, okay? Or if you watched Help 40 years ago, the old Beatles movie, you got a Hollywood version of Kali again. But the worship of the Thuggees goes on to this day. They still slaughter strangers in different parts of India. All right, it may be time to fully embrace Kali, the fierce one who destroys when necessary so that something else may live. She's saying we got to get to number 3. We often need to be fierce about our right to protect the autonomy of our lives and bodies. All of us who have chosen abortion are members of the sisterhood of Kali, even those of us who also mother children. She is the missing face of the goddess, and when we reclaim her beauty, we become more holy ourselves. Blessings to all of you. So this is the first time I've seen where somebody's come out, and again, I don't think it's surprising that it was written under a pseudonym. The first time it came out where somebody's claimed said, we got to get back to the real old ways. And this is what's spooky about the goths and the vampires, the young kids, especially amongst the runaway and throwaway kids, guys, that, inhabit most of the big cities. These kids are much more serious pagans than their parents. This is a generation growing up that didn't know Joseph, as it were. And their paganism is not driven by their hangover from their Christian upbringing. They're not worried about the poor.